So after NAFTA, we had a lot of factories shutting down and a lot of corporations investing in Mexico. Now, if the peso kept dropping and the bottom of the economy, fell out down there, a lot of people are going to be upset. A lot of people are going to be upset with Goldman Sachs and Robert Rubin because they had invested in a lot of treasuries. And also, there's going to be a lot of people upset with the politicians because they had approved NAFTA and caused all of this investment in Mexico. So the bottom's falling out of the Mexican peso, and the president, I'm reading in the Times, they're doing a good job of following this. The president's getting upset, getting nervous. So he goes to Congress, and he says to Congress, according to the Constitution, you guys, not me, only you can approve a legislation to bail out the Mexican peso to the tune of $20 billion. And so Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott said, well, okay. And so they went and they tried to bring it to the floor of the House and the Senate. But they couldn't, because in 1994, remember, there was this revolution, the Republican Revolution. The Republican Party took over, to the amazement of Dan Rather and a lot of other folks, they took over control of both the House and the Senate. And a lot of them ran on an anti-NAFTA platform. And so they didn't have the votes, according to the New York Times. And they came to the president and said, we can't. And so the president, according to the Times, over pizza in the White House, 5 people signed a memorandum. And it was the 2 majority and minority leaders of the House and the Senate and the president. And what did the memorandum say? We're going to bail out the Mexican peso for $20 billion. And here's how we're going to do it. And there were all of these organizations with these initials that I didn't know anything about. So I called the Cato Institute and I asked, is there anybody on your staff who can explain what just happened? And they said, no, we don't know. The guy you want to talk to is Walker Todd, who used to be director of research for the Federal Reserve in New York, and he's now out practicing law. And I said, okay, thank you very much. So I called the Heritage Foundation, and I asked them if they had anybody on their staff that could explain what just happened. How did they pull this off? Because my reading of the federal Constitution is, this is the responsibility of Congress, and there's nothing in the Constitution that allows Congress to transfer that power, that authority, to the president. And so they didn't know. And I said, who are all these initials? What are all these ESFs and all this? What's happened here? Well, they couldn't. And they said, the guy you want to talk to is Walker Todd. So all roads seemed to lead to this Walker Todd. So I called him. He was very accessible. He took the call. And I went over this. And I said, according to this, first of all, I don't know how they did this, but it does look like the president's doing this. And it looks like the president and the majority and minority leaders, well, that's not the House and the Senate. How could they do this? He said, Mr. Schulz, you're absolutely right. It's unconstitutional. So I said, well, isn't anybody going to challenge this? And he said, well, there are 20 new congressmen, young congressmen, who are making noises along those lines, and they're talking to Ross Perot to raise for the money to fund this lawsuit. I said, great, I got enough to do in New York. I don't have to concern myself with that. And so, as I'm reading the Times, things are advancing, and there's no lawsuit, but they're getting ready to send the money down. So I called Walker back, and I said, what happened? He said, well, the lawsuit fell apart. And I said, okay, then I will do what I can to defend the federal Constitution, these money clauses, the money clauses of the Constitution. And so I drew up this complaint, and I knew that standing would be an issue, and so I reached out to our membership around the state for people who own stock in Federal Reserve banks. We got about a dozen people. And so, as I often did with all of these lawsuits, to teach people how it's done and to get them through the process. We're all in this as pro se plaintiffs. I can't represent them because I'm not a lawyer, but they can read this complaint and sign it and says they read it and they understand it and I'm a plaintiff. So that's what everybody does in all of these cases. And so I prepared the complaint with these plaintiffs and ran it by Walker Todd, and he said it's great, it's good. And then Janet Reno was the was the Attorney General, and she filed a motion to dismiss this on the basis of sovereign immunity. So, in other words, you can't sue the government. And I said, wait a minute, Walker, what is this? We're sovereign. The government's not sovereign. What do you mean? This isn't the king. This is not a monarchy. I mean, where do they come off? And he said, Mr. Schulz, they do this all the time. They ask to dismiss cases against the government on the basis of sovereign immunity, and the courts go along. I said, no, that can't be. You know. So Judge Chalakas, who had the case, was dying. He was on his deathbed. He had this Lou Gehrig-type disease where his mind was fine, but his body just gave out. And so I think his law clerks, but they dismissed the case on the basis of sovereign immunity. So I called Walker and I said, Walker, this is terrible. We got to reverse this. This cannot stand. And he said, you're right. And so I said, what can we do? We got to write a really great brief to the Second Circuit. And so he said, well, let me see what I can do. And so he reached out to some friends of his and got a Yale professor. And we wrote a brief. And then Janet Reno responded. We're now at the Court of Appeals. And the brief came in. And on page, I'm reading it, and I'm in New York, and Walker's in Cleveland, and we get our briefs the same day. I'm reading mine, and I almost fell off the chair. You know, on page, 16 in a footnote, the government withdraws its sovereign immunity defense, saying, we're right. This is a constitutional issue, and we're sovereign because it's a constitutional issue. Wow. So I called Walker, and he said, I just read this. It's amazing. So, but the Court of Appeals dismissed it for lack of standing. And this really upsets people. It should upset you too, because for those of you who don't know what the standing doctrine is, you need to learn it. Let's say these two people, right here, Don and Lori. Gloria? Lori. They have a complaint against the government or anybody else. And so they go to court. And let's say the court is going to rule, either up or down, for Lori or against her. If the court's decision is not going to affect her, no matter how the court rules, she's not affected. Then the courts say she doesn't have standing, because we, the court, are not in the business of giving opinions, which is what it would be in her case. But Don, if the decision by the court, up or down, for or against him, is going to have an impact on him, if he's going to be impacted, then he has standing, and the court has to hear the case. They can't duck, out of the case. So why is this so upsetting for the court to rule that we didn't have standing in the Mexican peso case? Here's why it's wrong. It's dead wrong. It's part of the corruption in the judiciary. One thing I've learned in all of this is that the judiciary is highly politicized and very corrupt. And, well, from first-hand experience, I can document it, right? So, in any event, what's so upsetting about a federal court dismissing a case like this, which is on constitutional grounds, on the standing doctrine? Because it's dealing with the interpretation of the Constitution. It's dealing with the construction of the Constitution. No matter how the court rules, I've got to live under the Constitution the rest of my life, and so do all of you and my children and so forth. What do you mean I don't have standing? It's going to affect me. To say nothing about the people who own stock in the Federal Reserve banks. If Mexico doesn't pay the money back, those banks are going to take a hit, and these people are stockholders in those banks are going to take a hit. So anyway, that's the court. So we asked the Supreme Court to hear the case, wrote a petition for writ of certiorari, and the Supreme Court decided not to hear the case. It's political. If that issue, if there were enough people interested in that issue, as we've had interested, including media, in the Anna Nicole Smith life, the court would have heard the case, I think. See? But they said no. So that was the Mexican peso case. I'm now 1999. Yes, sir.
How can they deny certiorari on a constitutional issue? That's their primary purpose.
Because they want to, for whatever reason. They have a hidden agenda. They have a hidden reason. We'll get to that on this right to petition issue. But anyway, in 1999, I'm now a talk show host on a principal Albany, New York radio station, WROW, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. It was a great gig. All these people coming out of work with an attitude, right? and what my gig was, look, folks, this is our job. We have a duty and a responsibility to pay attention, to understand, to be better informed about what our rights are. So do you know there's a state constitution? Most people don't know that. Oh, we don't know that. Well, go get it. Here's how you can go get it. And then we have to be better informed about what's really going on in government. So we have to watch them. And there's lots of sources, you know, of news to find out what's going on in government. And then more importantly, we have to confront them whenever they step outside the boundaries that we, the people, have drawn around their power. Don't confuse that with political issues. If they have the authority to do something like raise the state sales tax from 7 to 8%, fine. That's a political question for the give and take of society. It's not a constitutional issue. Our job, as far as, you know, is to pay attention and nail the government whenever they step outside the boundaries we've drawn around their power. Because if they step outside, take one step outside the boundaries we've drawn around their power, they take possession of a boundless field of power. And that's pretty serious. So, on the radio, we say, look, this is what the government is doing, what do you say? And so, right, let's sue. All right, the filing fee is $240. Write a check for $25, all the money comes in for the filing fee. The case gets written and the people go to court. That was the gig, you know, on the radio. And so I'm heading down to the, two things happened in 1999. There was the Joe Bannister issue, which I'll come to, but there was the, I'm heading down to the studio in Albany, and the bombs begin to fall on Yugoslavia, Serbia, Kosovo. So I get on the air, and I said to the folks, whose decision was this? Get your federal constitution down. Whose decision was this? Well, the president. Well, what's the Constitution say? Well, the Constitution says you need a declaration of war. Was there a declaration of war? No. And so then, you know, you find people are out there. People are out there that they develop an interest in one issue or another. And you could ask a question on the radio, boy, there's somebody out there that has the answer, you know? And so I would say on the air, I said, well, okay, when's the last time we declared war? Well, World War II, that's pretty common knowledge. Well, okay, how many countries have we bombed and missiled? Oh, 17, a guy calls in. 17, he names them all. Okay? I said, without, you know, in violation of the War Powers Clause of the Constitution, you can't, according to the Constitution, government is prohibited, it's restricted. You can't apply the armed forces of the United States in hostilities overseas without a declaration of war. The way it's supposed to work is, if you've got the time, of course, if you're not attacked, but if you got the time, the way it's supposed to work is the president says, you know, we got to go to war. And so they say, okay, then the House and the Senate has a debate on the floor of the House and the Senate. Our representatives. One man doesn't decide to take us to war. Our representatives decide. They have a debate on the floor in the House and the Senate. They ask all the tough questions, all the second and third order questions. They get to the bottom of the issue. They don't just say, okay, President, you think we got to go, you decide if we have to and when. Okay? So in any event, here we are, 1999, the bombs are falling. So we say to the people, this was a question I would ask a lot of times, what does a free people do? They're apparently violating the Constitution here, the War Powers Clauses. What does a free people do, I would ask the audience. Well, okay, let's take them to court, because that's the kind of thing we did. And so I said, all right, who are the defendants? Well, it's the President, it's the Secretary of Defense, it's the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Okay, so we wrote up the brief, and we filed the case. And we said standing could be an issue, because we learned when the court doesn't want to hear a case, you know, they throw it out for standing. So I said, well, standing's got to be an issue. We better work pretty hard on the standing side of things here. So I asked on the air, does anybody in the audience own any land in Yugoslavia where these bombs are falling? Certainly you've got standing, right? You're affected, you know, up or down by the court's decision. You're going to be affected by this. And so our signal out of WROW was not strong enough to reach New York City. But word of mouth gets around. And so a day or so later, a call came in from a priest in Lower Manhattan, And he says, I've got a young man in my congregation who just graduated Fordham Law School, studied constitutional law. He says, you're absolutely right. He wants to be a plaintiff in your case. I said, great, I'll talk to him. So I talked to him, and I said, why do you think you have standing? And he said, because me and my sister and I, we own land in Montenegro and Belgrade. And my grandmother is sitting in an apartment in Belgrade. And so, you know, every now and then a missile goes astray, right? One went astray and hit the Chinese embassy and killed a bunch of people, got them upset. And so that's good, you got standing. And then I said on the air, these planes that are dropping these bombs and missiles over there, they're coming off of aircraft carriers. So they must be calling up reservists to aircraft engine mechanics and pilots, right? Anybody out there that's been called up or might be called up, within 6 minutes, a call came in from a guy that was with the 109th Air National Guard at the Schenectady Airport. Said, I've been listening to this show. And you're absolutely right. The Constitution just sits on the shelf. It can't defend itself. That's our job. And so I'd like to be a plaintiff. And then we had a couple of recently retired Air Force pilots who were flying commercial as plaintiffs also. So we brought the case. It was assigned to Judge Scullin. And we got word the next day that he wanted the papers served on all the defendants by 5 o'clock the following day. Well, of course, I had to do the show. So we have, as a board member, we have this fellow named Bert Dietz. He's in his 70s, but a very practical guy. You can rely on him. He gets the job done no matter what. He breaks through, goes over, goes around whatever barriers, and he gets the job done. So I called Bert. I said, Bert, I need some help. He said, what? I said, we need to serve this lawsuit on the President in the White House and on the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon by 5 o'clock tomorrow. And so he said, okay. So we put him on a plane, and he flew down, and I'm on the air, and at 4 o'clock he calls in, so I put him on the air to let people know. It doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter where your office is. These are your public servants. They are restricted in what they can do. Unlike you and I, we can do whatever we want to do. As long as there's no law that says we can't do it, government can't do it unless it's written. If it's not in writing, they can't do it. And the Constitution is a set of principles to govern the government. It talks about them, not us. It not only enables them to do certain things, but it's mostly prohibitive. I mean, it limits them. It restricts them. And so, no matter who they are, they're to be held accountable to the Constitution, period. And that's our job. The Constitution doesn't defend itself. Who else is going to defend it if we don't? Okay? So on the air, he explains how it went at the White House and how it went at the Pentagon. Serve the papers, just like that. Some 72-year-old guy can go down there and serve the papers and sue them. The case was dismissed for lack of standing. Even though, I mean, it's a constitutional issue. It should never have been dismissed for lack of standing because it's a constitutional question. But even though we had these people, you know, with land over there and people being called up and so forth. Anyway, the point is, again, the judiciary is highly politicized and very corrupt, and it's a lesson for us. Unless there's a lot of noise, unless people are, it's very hard for individuals and small groups to prevail. Unless we're organized and putting a collective foot down, understanding the issues and willing to stand together in large numbers, garnering attention. The media is not going to pick it up until until there's some event. Then they may pick it up. But there has to be that public interest. There has to be public discussion and public noise. You find that judges in the courts, they operate one way if they think nobody cares and they're operating in the dark. They operate in entirely another way if they think a lot of people are interested and they're following it, and the lights are on. So anyway, that was 1999. Also in 1999, getting ready for the show one day, an email crossed my screen, and it was about this fellow Joe Bannister, who was a special agent in the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, and he had resigned, or he had been shown the door. The way the story went, he had asked his superiors, asked the government to answer a few questions, to help him understand the law that he was enforcing. And rather than answer him, they fired him. So I had the producer track him down. I interviewed him at home just to see if his head was screwed on right, and was very impressed. And his report, he said, he took out a website, and I read his report, and I said, these are legitimate questions. The government should answer these questions. Why not? And so I determined right then and there that I was going to help this man get answers to his questions. I had him on the air. He introduced me to Bill Benson. We had Bill Benson on the air, and a few of these other people, Larry B. Kraft, the constitutional attorney. And so I'm learning now that there are all these questions about the origin, the allegedly fraudulent origin of the 16th Amendment and the illegal operation and enforcement of the federal income tax system. And so we decided on the air, talking to the audience, okay, we've heard these people, we've checked it out. It appears to us as though the government is violating the taxing clauses of the Constitution that prohibit a direct unapportioned tax on labor. If 1% is constitutional, so is 100%. I mean, where does slavery begin? You know? And so, how do we confront this? So there was discussion with people on the air. Well, you know, we're going to get thrown out for lack of standing if you take it to the courts. So we said, well, why petition? Let's not petition the court. Let's petition the executive and legislative branches. Let's take our grievance directly to the executive and legislative branches. Any branch is petitionable, any issue is petitionable. Let's take it directly to them. So that started, I won't go through all the detail, but it's all on our website. We decided to hold an academic symposium. We very carefully crafted a letter to the leaders of the executive and legislative branches, the head of the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader and the President and the Attorney General, and we said to them, we're going to be at the National Press Club on a certain date. And we would like you to bring your most knowledgeable people on these issues, this tax issue, and have them meet with us at the National Press Club and address these issues and answer a few questions. Well, we set the date at the National Press Club, and we were there, and the government didn't show. But C-SPAN showed. And C-SPAN covered that event live for 3.5 hours. So there was Joe Bannister and Lowell B. Kraft and others talking about these issues on national television live, rebroadcast several times. And that just started the whole effort. I found myself from the audience, the few people in the audience there, the question is, all right, now what? The government doesn't show. You know, we just did the appropriate thing. We invited the government to come into a recorded public forum and answer some questions. And they chose not to attend. So I said to them, well, we'll try again in November. We'll rent the main ballroom here, the big room, and we'll try again in November. And we did. The government didn't show again. But at that November meeting, the first one was in July, at that November meeting, we said, okay, we're going to prepare a written remonstrance, petition for redress of grievances. Remonstrance is a word that was used more frequently in the early days of the country than today. So we called it a remonstrance. We said we're going to, what we need is a delegation of people representing all 50 states here in Washington to serve this remonstrance. We'll put it up on the internet, see how many people signed it. 9,800 people did. And we'll serve it on the leaders of the House and the Senate and the White House. And we'll do that on April 13th or 15th the following year in 2000. And I have to tell you the story, I guess. How do you serve a petition? The question came up, how do you serve a petition for redress of grievances? A remonstrance. How do you serve that? Well, I didn't know. So a week before we were all scheduled to gather at the National Press Club, I said, gee, we're all going to be here next Tuesday, and we're going to have this petition to serve, but how do you go about serving it? So I went down to Washington to the White House. And around the White House, and I had never been there before, but around the White House is a wrought iron fence, right? And so I approached, you always take it the next step, you never know what's going to happen. You do the right thing. You do it because it's right. You never know what's going to happen. Now listen to this. So I approached this gate, and these guardhouses, these security checkpoints that they have around, they have this glass that you can't see in, but they can see out, so you never really know what's pointed at you or anything. And so this voice came out and said, yes, can I help you? And I said, well, we've got a lot of people gathering at the National Press Club next Tuesday, and we want to serve a petition for redress of these tax grievances on the president, but we don't know how to do that. Who's going to receive us? And is this the right gate? So the guy came out of his shack and he said, oh, I've been here a long time, this has never happened. So he said, use this phone and dial this number, which I did. I went through the whole spiel. I said who I was and that a delegation of the people were gathering in Washington at the National Press Club next Tuesday. We have this petition to serve for redress of these grievances regarding the legality of the income tax, and but we don't know where to bring it, who's going to receive it. So the person on the phone, the number I was given to dial, said, I don't know. So hang on. And so they transferred me to another department, and I went through the whole spiel again. Next Tuesday, there's going to be a delegation of the people representing all 50 states here with a petition on these, dealing with the legality of the income tax. Where do we bring it? Who's going to receive us? Who's going to accept it for the president? Don't know. So for 2 hours I was there. But after 2 hours, everybody in the White House knew that we were going to be there next Tuesday and that we were going to have this petition. And eventually, someone said, we'll call you back tomorrow. And they didn't. So here we are at the National Press Club. Now the government is obviously watching, and they're seeing that on our website that this is going to happen. That people are coming forward from Hawaii, Alaska, every state, and saying, "Okay, I'll be there." So we're going to have a delegation of people representing all 50 states to give this document to the president and to the Speaker of the House and the Senate. So they're watching this, and now we're at the press club getting ready to go over there, and we get a call from the White House. And it says, okay, 3 of you can come in. The rest will have to wait outside. So they're watching. They see we're serious. And Joe Bannister and I and a videographer then went in and met with President Clinton's economic advisor, and he accepted this petition for redress of grievances. And we said we'd like to try again to get the government to respond, and we're going to be back at the National Press Club in June. And he said, okay, we'll participate. And you saw a little clip of this in Aaron Russo's movie, by the way. You saw Jason Furman accepting the petition for the president on the income tax issue. So there's evidence that they got it, right? In any event, all of us then marched up and met with the policy advisor for Dennis Hastert and the Speaker of the House, and then met with the equivalent over in the Senate side of the Capitol with Tret Lott's policy advisor. And they all promised to participate at the June conference. Early in June, I called the White House, and Jason Furman then said, sorry, Mr. Schulz, we've changed our mind. We will not be participating in any conference. The legality of the income tax is not a high priority matter for the White House. That was pretty upsetting. We went ahead with the conference anyway. We had a great conference, Edwin Beer and a bunch of great speakers. But we decided to start publishing full-page ads. So in the just before the event, we had the centerfold in the Washington Times, and it said, "Dear government, why won't you answer the questions?" And we went through the whole story. Well, it's been a long, tough road, and we were trying everything and weren't getting anywhere. In 2001, we had published, at the end of 2000, we had signed a contract to publish 12 full-page ads in USA Today, $67,000 each. After 4 of them, they called, and Katie Emery, the person who had our account, she called and said, "Mr. Schulz, we can't run anymore. Why not?" "Well, the tax